She had 4 children at home, a husband the world adored, and a career she had spent 2 decades building. She had everything to lose, and still, she spoke. At 38 years old, Blake Lively stepped forward with allegations that set Hollywood on fire, and what came next was more complicated, more brutal, and more revealing than almost anyone predicted. This is the full story, who Blake Lively is, before everything fell apart. To understand what Blake Lively risked when she filed her complaint in December 2024, it helps to understand what she had built in the years before it. She was born Blake Ellender Brown on August 25, 1987, in Los Angeles, the daughter of actor and director Ernie Lively and talent manager Elaine McAlpin Lively. Her family was steeped in the entertainment business. She grew up watching her parents teach acting classes, absorbing the rhythms and discipline of the craft without ever having formally chosen it as a path. She attended 13 different schools before graduating from Burbank High School in 2005, where she was a senior class president and a member of the championship choir. She had been accepted to Stanford University. She was going to study, not perform. Then her brother Eric sent her on a few auditions during the summer between her junior and senior years. She was cast as Bridget Vreeland in The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, filmed her scenes, finished high school, and launched a career that has never fully stopped moving. The television role that made her a household name arrived in 2007, when she was cast as Serena van der Woodsen in the CW's Gossip Girl, a show about extraordinarily wealthy teenagers navigating the social hierarchies of Manhattan's Upper East Side. The role ran for 6 seasons, ending in 2012, and made Lively into something closer to a cultural icon than simply an actress. Serena was everything: beautiful, complicated, occasionally self-destructive, magnetically watchable. The character suited her. Lively had an ease on screen that most performers spend years developing. She also had judgment about the roles she took alongside the show. During Gossip Girl's run, she appeared in Ben Affleck's crime drama The Town in 2010, holding her own against a cast that included Jeremy Renner and Jon Hamm in a film that critics praised widely. She appeared opposite Ryan Reynolds in the superhero film Green Lantern in 2011, a film that was not a critical success, but that introduced her to the man she would marry on September 9, 2012. They have 4 children together, daughters James, Inez, and Betty, born in 2014, 2016, and 2019 respectively, and a son named Olin, born in February 2023. After Gossip Girl ended, Lively built a film career that balanced commercial projects with more serious work. The Shallows in 2016, in which she carried a survival thriller largely on her own, was one of the more impressive solo performances of the decade, a film that required her to be on screen almost constantly, against a minimal supporting cast, holding the audience's attention through physical performance and emotional precision. A Simple Favor in 2018 leaned into dark comedy and showed a different range entirely, pairing her with Anna Kendrick in a story of suburban mystery and deception that allowed Lively to play someone genuinely unlikable and compelling at the same time. She was producing as well as acting, building a brand that extended into the business world, a hair care line called Blake Brown Beauty, and a sparkling drink brand called Betty Buzz, while maintaining the kind of tabloid-friendly celebrity presence that seemed, from the outside, entirely controlled and curated. She and Reynolds were also known for their quick, ironic social media presence, their banter, and their apparent domestic happiness. For a certain section of the celebrity-watching public, they represented something like the ideal of a modern Hollywood couple, successful separately, devoted together, funny about all of it. Taylor Swift is the godmother of Lively and Reynolds' 3 daughters. That friendship, which has been warm and public for years, would later be dragged into the legal proceedings, an indication of how thoroughly the Baldoni dispute eventually reached into every corner of Lively's personal life. Then came It Ends With Us, and everything that had been curated began to unravel. The next chapter of this story begins not with a lawsuit, but with a novel, and the complicated choices that turned a book about surviving abuse into one of Hollywood's most contentious productions ever filmed. The film that started everything. It Ends With Us is a 2016 novel by Colleen Hoover, one of the best-selling authors of the 2020s. The book tells the story of Lily Bloom, a young woman who escapes a difficult home life, builds a small business in Boston, and falls into a relationship that slowly becomes dangerous with a brilliant, charismatic man named Ryle Kincaid. The story addresses the cycle of relationships involving harmful behavior with unflinching honesty and refuses to make the experience simple or the exit easy. It became one of the most widely read and discussed novels on the platform TikTok, where Hoover's work had found an enormous and passionate audience, particularly through communities of readers sharing stories of personal recognition. The hashtag for the book eventually accumulated billions of views. Its readership was, in significant part, survivors of difficult relationships who recognized the story as their own, which made the subject matter of the film's production dispute carry a weight that a different kind of Hollywood conflict would not have had. In July 2019, Justin Baldoni announced on Instagram that he had acquired the film rights to adapt the novel through his production company, Wayfarer Studios. Baldoni was best known to most audiences as Rafael Solano, the lead character in the Jane the Virgin television series, in which he had played a thoughtful, emotionally complex romantic lead from 2014 through 2019. The show had earned him a dedicated following and a reputation for the kind of warm, expressive performance that romantic drama requires. But he had also built a significant second identity beyond acting. He gave a widely shared TED Talk in 2017 about masculinity and emotional vulnerability, calling on men to resist the cultural pressure to suppress their feelings. He released a documentary series exploring what he described as the crisis of modern masculinity. He had written a book. He spoke regularly at events about empathy, fatherhood, and personal authenticity. His public persona was, in other words, constructed around a very specific set of values. And those values aligned precisely with the kind of sensitivity required to handle a story like Colleen Hoover's novel about surviving an abusive relationship. That positioning would later become a central element of how Lively's legal team framed the dispute. Her amended complaint would describe his public persona as that of a leader of what he himself called a male feminist movement, and would argue that the contrast between that public identity and the behavior she alleged in private was a core part of what made the situation so damaging. Baldoni's team denied the premise entirely, but the gap between public persona and private conduct, the gap between who someone says they are and what those around them experience, was one of the questions the entire legal process circled without ever fully resolving. In January 2023, Blake Lively was announced as cast in the role of Lily Bloom. Colleen Hoover herself had suggested Baldoni for the role of Ryle Kincaid, the abusive husband. Baldoni would also direct. Additional cast members included Brandon Sklenar, Jenny Slate, and comedian Hassan Minhaj. Principal photography began in Hoboken, New Jersey, in May 2023. Production paused due to the 2023 Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA strikes that shut down much of Hollywood, before resuming in January 2024 in Jersey City. During the months of production, Lively was also a producer on the film. She had creative input and creative stakes. The collaboration between a producer-actress and a director-actor is not inherently unusual in Hollywood, but it can be complicated, particularly when the actress in question has strong views about how the story she is helping tell should be handled. The film's subject matter, the slow, difficult experience of recognizing and leaving an abusive relationship, required a specific kind of care and consistency. The question of who had authority over those creative decisions and what happened when opinions differed was one of the fault lines along which the whole dispute would eventually crack. Early photographs from the set drew some public commentary. Lively's wardrobe choices for Lily Bloom were described by some fans online as not matching the character they knew from the book. Some observers also raised questions about whether Lively, at 36 during production, was too old to play a character who was in her early 20s in the novel. These criticisms were relatively minor at the time, but they would later become part of a larger context around how the film was received and how its press campaign unfolded. It Ends With Us was released in theaters on August 9, 2024. It earned $50 million domestically and $80 million globally in its opening weekend. By August 20th, it had crossed $100 million at the domestic box office. By almost every commercial measure, it was a success. On that same opening weekend, Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool and Wolverine occupied the #1 spot at the box office, with It Ends With Us at number 2. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds became the first married Hollywood couple to have two separate films they starred in top the box office on the same weekend, since Bruce Willis and Demi Moore did it in 1990. But even as the box office numbers came in, something was visibly wrong. At the New York premiere on August 6, 2024, Lively and Baldoni did not take photographs together. Their separation on the red carpet was noticeable. In the weeks that followed, Lively's press tour approach, discussing her hair care brand and her sparkling drink company in interviews while promoting a film about domestic abuse, drew significant criticism from fans who felt the tone was mismatched with the material. Whether that dissonance was intentional or the result of circumstances the public did not yet understand was a question that would take months to answer. What was happening behind the scenes would emerge in devastating detail 4 months later. But before the complaint was filed, another machine had already been set in motion. The smear campaign, before anyone knew it was happening. In August 2024, the same month the film opened, Justin Baldoni hired Melissa Nathan, a crisis public relations specialist who had previously worked on high-profile Hollywood reputation management cases. A separate PR firm, JonesWorks, whose founder Stephanie Jones had previously represented Baldoni, was also involved in the campaign surrounding the film. What the public did not know at the time was that within Baldoni's PR team, communications were circulating that would later become some of the most explosive documents in the entire legal dispute. Those communications, internal text messages between Baldoni's publicists, were what drove the entire legal saga into public view. The messages were obtained by Lively's legal team through a covert lawsuit Lively had filed quietly in September 2024, months before she went public with her complaint, when her attorneys used a pre-litigation subpoena to obtain the communications from a third party. What they found was a record of a deliberate strategy, messages that discussed, among other things, how to bury Lively, and plans for what the complaint later described as a coordinated campaign to turn public opinion against the actress before she could go public with her own account. The specific details of those messages, once they became public, were striking. They documented what appeared to be a professional operation, a planned response to a situation that Baldoni's team apparently anticipated. The existence of a crisis PR hire just weeks after the film opened, combined with internal communications discussing how to handle Lively's reputation, formed the factual foundation of the retaliation claims Lively would pursue through the courts. On December 21, 2024, the New York Times published a 4,000-word investigative article titled, "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine." Written by reporters Megan Twohey, Mike McIntyre, and Julie Tate, the piece detailed Lively's allegations and contained the contents of her California Civil Rights Department complaint, which typically remains confidential. The article described Lively as an actress who had endured months of alleged misconduct from Baldoni on set, and who then allegedly faced a coordinated reputational attack when she raised those concerns. The day the article published, the talent agency William Morris Endeavor, which represented both Lively and Reynolds, and also represented Baldoni, dropped Baldoni as a client. That consequence was immediate and severe. His professional representation was gone within hours of the story becoming public. On December 20th, one day before the Times article was published, Lively had filed her complaint with the California Civil Rights Department. Then, on December 31st, she formalized it into a full federal lawsuit filed in the Southern District of New York. The charges were serious. She alleged Baldoni had made inappropriate comments about her appearance, asked personal questions about her intimate life with her husband, spoken to cast and crew about his personal history with adult content, added improvised physical content to scenes that had not been choreographed, and entered her makeup trailer without consent at times when she was undressed or nursing her youngest child. Baldoni and his team denied all of it. They described the allegations as fabricated, and they moved quickly to fight back. What came next was one of the most intense legal battles Hollywood had seen in years, and the weapons being used on both sides were far from ordinary. The counterpunch, Baldoni fights back. Baldoni's response to Lively's lawsuit was not quiet. On January 16, 2025, Baldoni filed a civil lawsuit directly against Lively and her husband Ryan Reynolds, as well as their publicist Leslie Sloan and Sloan's firm Vision PR. The complaint was 179 pages long. It sought $400 million in damages, citing defamation and extortion. The filing offered a dramatically different version of events. In Baldoni's telling, Lively and Reynolds had not been victims of anything. they had been the aggressors. The complaint alleged that Lively had used false misconduct allegations as leverage to seize creative control of the film. Then, when the film's press tour did not go well and her public image suffered, had chosen to redirect attention by destroying his career through the New York Times article. The lawsuit described Lively and Reynolds as two of the most powerful stars in Hollywood who had wielded that power to take an entire film from its director and production studio. The complaint also sought to reframe specific incidents that appeared in Lively's complaint. One notable example involved claims in Lively's original filing that Baldoni had repeatedly entered her makeup trailer without consent while she was in a state of undress, including while nursing. Baldoni's legal team countered this by producing a text message in which Lively herself had mentioned to Baldoni that she was nursing in her trailer and extended an open invitation if he wanted to run lines. Baldoni's team argued the text proved the encounter had been consensual. Lively's team argued the text had been stripped of its surrounding context and that the full chain of communications told a different story. This dispute over the interpretation of the same text message, one piece of evidence read in two completely different ways, illustrated the difficulty at the heart of the entire case. The lawsuit also made specific claims about Reynolds. According to the complaint, Reynolds had berated Baldoni in a meeting at the couple's apartment in New York's Tribeca neighborhood, and had also attempted to pressure WME to drop Baldoni as a client during the Deadpool and Wolverine premiere in July 2024. WME denied any pressure was applied. On the same day that Baldoni filed his suit against Lively and Reynolds, he also filed a separate $250 million libel lawsuit against the New York Times itself, alleging the publication had relied on selectively chosen and altered communications, stripped of context, to create a false narrative. The lawsuit described the Times as having cowered to the wants and whims of powerful Hollywood elites. The Times defended its reporting as meticulously researched and said it planned to vigorously defend against the lawsuit. The two lawsuits, from Lively against Baldoni and from Baldoni against Lively and the Times, were at that point separate. They were later consolidated into one legal proceeding in the Southern District of New York, presided over by U.S. District Judge Louis J. Lyman, with a trial date eventually set for May 2026. Over the months that followed, the legal battle expanded in ways that drew in figures well beyond the two principals. Lively subpoenaed celebrity blogger Perez Hilton in July 2025, alleging he may have been part of the coordinated campaign against her. Hilton denied involvement and filed a motion to challenge the subpoena. Baldoni's team attempted to subpoena Taylor Swift, arguing she had material relevant to communications with Lively, but Swift denied any involvement in the production dispute, and the subpoena was later withdrawn following criticism from the court. Scooter Braun, the entertainment executive with whom Taylor Swift has her own very public history, was also drawn into the proceedings when Lively subpoenaed a company connected to his firm. The connections between the two legal disputes, Lively versus Baldoni, and Swift's own prior dispute with Braun, made the proceedings feel, at times, like a window into the full complexity of Hollywood power networks. In June 2025, Judge Lyman dismissed Baldoni's $400 million lawsuit against Lively, Reynolds, and Sloan, as well as his $250 million libel suit against the Times. The judge's ruling on the Lively suit determined that an employee's right to raise concerns about workplace misconduct is legally protected, and that even if those concerns turned out not to be needed, they cannot form the basis of a defamation or extortion claim. Baldoni's team described the dismissal as procedural. Lively's team described it as a victory, and the case continued. But the moment that prompted Blake Lively to finally speak directly to the public, in her own words, at her most direct, came in April 2026, when the judge issued a ruling that dramatically narrowed her own lawsuit. At 38, Blake Lively finally speaks. In April 2026, U.S. District Judge Louis J. Lyman issued a 152-page ruling that dismissed 10 of the 13 claims in Lively's lawsuit against Baldoni. Among the dismissed claims were her allegations of on-set misconduct. The reason for the dismissal of the misconduct claims was not a finding that the behavior described had not occurred. It was a legal determination that Lively, as a producer on the film, was classified as an independent contractor rather than an employee, which placed her outside the protections of the federal civil rights statutes she had attempted to invoke. 3 claims survived: retaliation, aiding and abetting retaliation, and breach of contract. Those 3 remaining claims were not against Baldoni personally. They were against Wayfarer Studios, an associated LLC, and the public relations company retained by his team. The ruling was a partial victory for both sides, and each interpreted it as such. Baldoni's legal team issued a statement expressing they were very pleased that all claims against Baldoni personally and all of the misconduct-related claims had been dismissed. They said the allegations had been serious, and they were grateful to the court for its careful review. Lively's attorney, Michael Gottlieb, offered a counter-read of the same ruling. He noted that the court had found that Lively had presented sufficient evidence to go to trial on her core claims, specifically that she had privately raised concerns about on-set behavior, that she had reasonable grounds to do so, and that Baldoni and his production company had taken steps that harmed her reputation and career. He described the retaliation claims as the beating heart of the case, and said the dismissal of some claims due to legal technicalities was not the same as an endorsement of the defendant's conduct. Lively responded on her own Instagram stories in a statement that was direct and personal. She described the lawsuit as the last thing she had wanted in her life. She wrote that she had brought the case because of the retaliation she faced for privately and professionally asking for a safe working environment for herself and others. She expressed her hope that the court's decision would show others that, no matter how painful it is, they can speak up. She wrote that she would never stop doing her part to expose the systems and people who seek to harm, shame, silence, and retaliate against those who come forward. She also addressed the public framing of the entire dispute directly, urging her audience not to be distracted by what she called the digital soap opera, and describing the constant packaging of her lawsuit as celebrity drama as something that was not only irresponsible, but deliberate. She described the experience of coordinated online targeting as a form of real harm, one that extends far beyond famous people and that affects ordinary individuals, especially younger people on digital platforms, in ways that are often not visible from the outside. It was the most direct she had been at any point in the entire dispute. For an actress who had spent years maintaining one of the most carefully constructed public images in Hollywood, speaking in her own words about her own experience, rather than through the filtered language of legal complaints and attorney statements, was a significant departure. The trial, originally set to begin May 18, 2026, never happened. 2 weeks before jury selection was scheduled to start, Lively withdrew her remaining claims, and the parties announced they had reached a settlement. The terms were not disclosed publicly at first. The joint statement released by both legal teams said they were firmly committed to workplaces free of impropriety, that they hoped the settlement would bring closure and allow all involved to move forward in peace, and, crucially, that they acknowledged the concerns raised by Lively deserved to be heard. That last phrase was widely noted. It was not an admission of liability, but it was something. In June 2026, the settlement terms were made public. Under the agreement, all parties waived any future litigation, bringing the legal dispute to a formal and final close. On the question of financial damages, Lively received no monetary payment from Baldoni or Wayfarer as part of the settlement itself. What remained was a separate motion she had filed under a California law designed to protect those who come forward about misconduct from being silenced through retaliatory defamation claims. On that motion, Judge Lyman ruled that the law did not provide the compensatory and punitive damages Lively had sought, though he did order Baldoni to pay a portion of Lively's legal fees related to his defamation claim. Baldoni's attorney described the outcome as a complete victory for the Wayfarer parties. Lively's attorney described the acknowledgement in the joint statement that her concerns deserved to be heard as meaningful. Both were claiming the better end of something that, by any measure, had cost everyone involved enormously. What the story left behind. What the Lively-Baldoni dispute ultimately produced was a case study in several things at once: the mechanics of crisis public relations in Hollywood, the limitations of legal protection for independent contractors in the entertainment industry, the way coordinated online campaigns can function as tools of professional destruction, and the specific difficulty facing any public figure who raises concerns about misconduct when their own image and public behavior can be weaponized against them. The press tour criticism Lively faced in August 2024 for her approach to promoting a film about domestic abuse while discussing her personal brand became, in the legal context that followed, something more than an opinion. Baldoni's team argued that the public's negative reaction to her press tour behavior was authentic and organic, not manufactured. Lively's team argued that elements of the negative coverage had been seeded and amplified by professionals paid to do so. Both things could contain elements of truth simultaneously. The public could have genuinely felt the mismatch between the film's subject and the promotional tone, while also being exposed to manufactured content designed to deepen that feeling. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, and the fact that they are not is precisely what makes the campaign Lively described so difficult to detect in real time. The question of independent contractor status, which caused the dismissal of Lively's core sexual harassment claims, is significant well beyond this specific case. Under federal civil rights law, the protections against workplace misconduct apply to employees. Producers on film sets, who may have significant power and significant financial stakes, are often classified as independent contractors. That classification creates a legal gap. The same behavior that would expose a company to liability when directed at an employee may not trigger the same legal consequences when directed at a producer. Lively's case did not change that gap. It documented it, plainly and publicly. Justin Baldoni, after the settlement, continued facing professional consequences from the period of the dispute. He had been dropped by WME in December 2024 and had lost the jobs that followed. His public identity, as a thoughtful advocate for emotional authenticity in men, had been the subject of sustained scrutiny during the litigation, with Lively's amended complaint specifically noting the contradiction between his public persona and the behavior she alleged in private. His attorney called the settlement a total victory for the Wayfarer parties. What that victory looked like in terms of his professional standing was less clear. The film itself, the story of Lily Bloom, based on Colleen Hoover's novel about the cycle of surviving an abusive relationship, was caught in the middle of everything. It had earned enormous commercial success. It had also been surrounded, from the moment it opened, by a dispute between its two leads that made it almost impossible to discuss the film's actual subject without the surrounding noise overwhelming the conversation. The novel is, at its heart, about a woman who refuses to be silent about what has happened to her. That story was told, in one form or another, on multiple fronts simultaneously. Colleen Hoover, whose novel made all of this possible, watched from the periphery as the story she had written about a woman finding the courage to leave a dangerous relationship became the backdrop for a highly publicized legal conflict between two of the most powerful people in the industry. The survivors of domestic abuse, who had seen themselves in the book, watched the same thing. There is one thing that the entire dispute made undeniably visible. When Lively described the coordinated use of social media to direct public hostility toward a specific person, she gave that tactic a name, a paper trail, and a courtroom. Her claim that a digital army had been deployed against her, whether or not every element of that claim survived the legal process, introduced a vocabulary into the public conversation that many people recognized from their own experience of online life. Coordinated campaigns of reputational harm have a long history. They have rarely been litigated with this level of documentation. What Blake Lively chose to do with her platform, to speak, to stay, to keep pressing even as the legal ground shifted under her, is something that will take time to fully evaluate. She said she hoped her case would show others that speaking up is possible. Her outcome, which ended without a financial victory and with many of her claims dismissed, also showed the limits of the systems in place to support those who do. She was 38 years old when the story ended. She had spoken. What came of it is part of the record now. Complicated, contested, and unfinished in the way that most true things are.